Hi, this is Dr. Sana Hashmi. And this week in my Print on China column, I explore Chinese discourse on a topic that is not getting a lot of attention in the Indian media these days, but this has become a very chronic issue with respect to China, and that is the violent attacks, the terror attacks on the critical infrastructure by China in Pakistan. So I'm talking about China-Pakistan economic corridor and China's so-called development of infrastructure in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. So for decades, India has faced terrorism spilling over from Pakistan, as in India has been a long-term victim of that. But in the past decade, in the past couple of years, China has also joined the list of targets. As in surprising, of course, when we talk about China, Pakistan, and China becoming a victim of terrorism in Pakistan is something that is, of course, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but this is something that is very much a reality. And for China, the cost is, of course, human, strategic, and economic, and is actually mounting. Every year, it actually the cost becomes higher and higher. So now, coming to the most important aspect of that, the China-Pakistan economic corridor. It is supposed to be the flagship project of the Belt and Road Initiative, a symbol of cooperation between China and Pakistan. At least this is what they project. But instead, it is repeatedly hit by violence. So headlines such as Chinese convoys attacked, explosions in capital killing Chinese citizens. There is absolutely a pattern, and this is not something that is being overlooked in Beijing. And it's proving to be costly for China now. Ignoring it, it would become much more costlier. So, in the latest round of terror attacks earlier this year, the Baluch Liberation Army launched a coordinated attacks, which was named as Operation Hero Phase 2 2.0, where soldiers and civilians were killed in Quetta and Gwadar. So, Gwadar port is supposed to be the crown jewel for the CPEC and for China. There was a stark warning, which was again a reminder that even their most prized overseas projects is vulnerable to terrorism, a terrorism that is actually emanating from Pakistan. So, just to give you some figures, in the last 5 years, at least Chinese nationals, Chinese citizens have died in Pakistan working on the CPC, working on the BRI projects, and even dozens have been injured. Uh, Suicide bombings, targeted attacks, it's all relentless. And Pakistan's response, um, it's not very much different from what we have heard before. So Chinese observers see that as often reactive, fragmented, under-resourced, underprepared, and Beijing knows its investment on the CPEC are now being exposed. So what is China doing? What actions will China take? Will it intervene militarily? So the questions are being asked on the Chinese internet, and the consensus, the view is in China is that Beijing is constrained, so it might not intervene militarily, which might be considered as interfering in Pakistan's internal affair. So the view in China is that it won't send troops into Pakistan, but it has to keep taking steps which could be legal, calculated, and should be aimed squarely at protecting its citizen and projects and its investment in Pakistan. And it could be in the face of safety warnings, evacuations, on site security, satellite intelligence, anti terrorism gear, and maybe train Pakistan forces to respond faster, smarter, and more effectively. So, in their view, China walks a fine line. It has to help Pakistan without really becoming a target itself, which is, of course, in itself very difficult. So, intelligence, equipment, diplomatic backing, these are some of the steps that are all designed to stabilize the situation while keeping Chinese projects safe. And in late January 2026, Pakistan, this is what the claim is on the Chinese internet, that Pakistan, using Chinese intelligence, launched a massive counter-terror sweep in Balochistan, which which spanned over 40 hours, and as a result, 145 militants were killed. And it was the largest operation, allegedly the largest operation in the province since they started this war on terror. And they believe that this actually could happen primarily using Chinese intelligence and logistical support. And China sees both sides here, that there is this dependence and then limits as well. Pakistan cannot really protect these projects alone, so China definitely has to keep helping Pakistan, but not in a way that might come across as being a part of Pakistan's war on terror, and so that it doesn't come across as uh, intruding into Pakistan's internal affairs. So this is what the claim is on the Chinese internet. But then to respond to Chinese concerns, to respond to Chinese, to alleviate Chinese fears, there was this special protection unit that was announced by Pakistan Interior Minister that was budgeted at 260 million US dollars and is now tasked with guarding Chinese projects. Patrols, escorts, emergency response, joint counterterrorism training and exercises with China are some of the facets of the so-called special protection unit. And Chinese analysts see it as a proof or an evidence that Pakistan wants to protect Chinese investment. But they also believe that they definitely need more and more Chinese support, and China needs to be more involved in protecting its own investment. And more importantly, it has to minimize the human cost. And some voices in China are also warning. So this is actually a very rare instance where now we are seeing that there are a number of observers who are actually issuing warning to Pakistan. They accept that the relations are deep, but not endlessly. China is not going to be tolerant for a longer time. And they say that when Chinese lives are at stake, goodwill alone won't really cut it, and Pakistan must act or risk losing trust and investment from China. But more importantly, much more than money, it's the Chinese support that they have been talking about. Then, of course, there's also this acknowledgement that since CPEC has been there for over 13 years, it has not really been the easiest project for China. And one commentator actually described it as like pushing a truck through a desert at night, that is slow, exhausting, and deadly. So you cannot really see anything, but you're just moving at a very slow pace. And Chinese observers see Pakistan's counter terror machinery as somewhat stagnant and incapable. And without support, the army's efforts are like a car without gas, which is going nowhere. So this was stated by one of the anti-terrorism expert, Chao Hua. And they also point out that the attacks that have been conducted by Baloch Liberation Army are somewhat sophisticated. So the threat that is coming out from the BLA is actually sophisticated, that uses encrypted communication, night vision, even foreign training. And some of the observers, some of the analysts, and in fact, there's a view on the Chinese internet that there is an external backing behind all of this. And of course, they are also naming countries such as India and the US. They say that this is actually aimed at disrupting CPEC and stretching Pakistan's security forces to the limit. But this, in my view, is just another attempt to externalize the blame. And I feel that if this narrative, they keep pushing this narrative, this will further absolve Pakistan of any responsibility to maybe seriously work on its counter-terrorism efforts and to uh, maybe deal with the issue that has its root in Pakistan. So China frames this attack and the attacks that have been happening for a long time as primarily externally driven. And I believe that this is both to shift focus from Pakistan's security failures as well as to signal its own frustration with Pakistan. Some commentators even suggest Beijing may one day need a direct and more proactive presence in Pakistan, maybe in the form of troops in Gwadar, though Islamabad, in their view, resist on sovereignty grounds. So this is something that is going to be problematic and tricky for China. Then Chinese analysts also bring this Pakistan US cooperation angle. And so Shu Chin, who is the former editor in chief of the Global Times, he actually warned that any collaboration between the US and Pakistan must not really compromise Chinese interest. And if Pakistan ignores this, he argues that would carry a heavy price for Pakistan. So the discourse in China on the CPEC, on the attacks, tells me that in Beijing, patience might be running thin now with Pakistan and with the attacks. And every attack which is a lot of attacks on the CPEC since the beginning of the project, chips away China's confidence in the project, or maybe in Pakistan as well, which would in turn raise the stakes. So publicly, China stays calm and also project trust in Pakistan's intentions, at least if not its capabilities, specifically in the English media statements by the spokesperson. But privately, I feel it is a totally different story. What I'm seeing specifically after studying the discourse, that the frustration in China is growing. And why it is growing? Because they do not really have a lot of trust within Pakistan, not on its limited capacity. Why there is a lot of frustration? Why? Because they do not really have a lot of trust in Pakistan's ability to deal with the issue to protect the Chinese citizen and its investment. So Pakistan's limited capacity combined with its reluctance to fully safeguard Chinese project, I think, is actually leaving Beijing with a fewer option now. The CPEC was meant to be a symbol of cooperation. Now it is actually a tightrope walk for China. So the dilemma for China is that China must protect its investment in Pakistan while also supporting Pakistan against India. So now I feel it is actually navigating a minefield of risk, all without crossing into direct military involvement. So the stakes, I believe, could not be really higher for China. Yet, as terror attacks intensify, Pakistan's limited capacity and its reluctance to do anything with terrorism is something that is becoming a much bigger problem for China, even if it doesn't really admit it. So but having said that, I do not really see it backing away from the CPEC, backing away from Pakistan. And the reason is, of course, India. India continues to play a key role in Chinese calculations, specifically in the Indian subcontinent. But of course, the collateral damage may become too high for China to ignore in times to come. So we have to wait and watch how CPEC becomes a bigger liability and bigger problem for China, and how does China respond to it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.